Christmas night had always been special to Margaret. Even now, at 62, she believed in the quiet magic of it. The soft lights, the smell of food, the feeling that family should matter more than anything else. That night, the house glowed with warm yellow lights, and the Christmas tree stood tall in the corner, decorated with ornaments Margaret had collected over decades. Before continue, please subscribe my channel, Hazel's Stories. Now let's start the story. She had been awake since early morning. Margaret moved slowly through the kitchen, her hands aching as she lifted heavy pots from the stove. The turkey was finally done. Mashed potatoes, gravy, roasted vegetables, everything was ready. She wiped her hands on her apron and took a deep breath. This dinner had to be perfect. It was Christmas, after all. In the living room, laughter echoed. Her son, Daniel, sat comfortably on the couch with his wife, Claire. Claire's parents were there too, sipping wine and smiling. They all looked relaxed, dressed nicely, enjoying themselves. Margaret watched them from the kitchen doorway for a brief moment. No one noticed her standing there. She quietly picked up the serving tray. Margaret carried the food to the table and began setting it down. Plates clinked softly. She smiled politely, waiting for someone, anyone, to offer help. No one did. "Mom, can you bring the gravy?" Daniel said, without looking up from his phone. "Yes, dear," Margaret replied gently. She turned back to the kitchen, her steps slow but steady. She told herself it was fine. She didn't mind serving. She just wanted the night to go smoothly. She wanted peace. When she returned, Claire was laughing loudly. "I swear, this looks just like a restaurant." Margaret smiled again, unsure. "That's because Mom's been running around like a waitress all day," Daniel said casually, with a small laugh. The words landed softly, but they stayed. A few people chuckled, someone cleared their throat. Margaret felt her chest tighten, but she kept her smile. She placed the gravy on the table and stepped back. "I'll bring the bread," she said quietly. As she walked away, her hands trembled. Margaret had raised Daniel on her own after his father passed away. She worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, just to keep food on the table. She remembered nights when she went to bed hungry so Daniel could eat. She remembered Christmas mornings when she wrapped gifts late at night after coming home exhausted. And now she was just a waitress. When Margaret returned with the bread, everyone had already started eating. No one waited for her. She stood there for a second, unsure where to sit. "Mom, can you grab some more napkins?" Daniel said, finally looking up. "Yes, dear," Margaret said softly. Claire leaned towards her mother and whispered something. They laughed again. Margaret pretended not to hear. As the dinner went on, Margaret moved back and forth, refilling glasses, clearing plates, wiping spills. Her apron was stained. Her back ached. Still, she said nothing. At one point, she accidentally spilled a little water near Daniel's plate. "Seriously?" Daniel snapped. "Be careful." "I'm sorry," Margaret said quickly. Claire rolled her eyes. Margaret felt heat rise to her face. She stepped into the kitchen, gripping the counter to steady herself. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window. Tired eyes, gray hair pulled back, shoulders slightly bent. She whispered to herself, "Just get through tonight." But Christmas night wasn't done with her yet. When dessert was served, Margaret finally sat down at the far end of the table. Her slice of pie was smaller than the others. She didn't complain. Daniel raised his glass. "Let's make a toast," he said, "to family." Margaret looked up, hope flickering in her chest. Daniel continued, smiling, "And to Mom for serving us so well tonight." Laughter broke out. Claire clapped lightly. "Yes, thank you. You were very efficient." The word cut deeper than any insult. Margaret's hands froze around her fork. Her smile faded. The room felt suddenly quiet, even though people were still laughing. She looked at her son. He didn't see her pain, or maybe he did and didn't care. In that moment, something inside Margaret cracked. She stood up slowly. "I'll clean up," she said. No one stopped her. In the kitchen, Margaret leaned against the sink, her breath shaky. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not tonight. Not in this house. She heard voices from the dining room, Daniel's voice, Claire's laughter. Then she heard something else, a sentence that made her heart stop. I don't know why she acts like this is her house. She should remember her place. Margaret closed her eyes. Her place. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart pound hard and fast. She realized then that the humiliation wasn't over. Christmas night had only just begun, and what her son would do next would break her in ways she never expected. Margaret stayed in the kitchen long after the voices from the dining room faded into low laughter. The sink was full of plates, but she didn't move. Her hands rested on the counter as memories rose, one after another, like ghosts she could never escape. She remembered the first Christmas after Daniel's father died. Daniel was only 6. The house was cold that year because the heater barely worked. Margaret wrapped him in an old blanket and told him stories to make him smile. She skipped meals so he wouldn't notice there was less food. She smiled so he wouldn't see the fear in her eyes. No one at that table remembered that. Margaret slowly began washing dishes. The warm water soothed her hands, but not her heart. Every clink of a plate sounded louder than it should have. Each scrape of leftover food reminded her of how little respect she had left in that house. She remembered working double shifts at the diner. She had worn the same kind of apron she wore tonight. Long hours, tired feet, rude customers. But she always came home with a smile for Daniel. She helped with homework late at night, even when her eyes could barely stay open. "You can be anything," she used to tell him. "Just promise you'll be kind." He promised. That promise felt very far away now. From the living room, Margaret heard Claire's voice. Soft, sharp, controlled. "I just don't understand why she's still here," Claire said. "Most people our age don't live with their parents." Daniel replied quietly, but Margaret still heard him. "She has nowhere else to go." The words hit harder than the insults. Nowhere else to go. Margaret turned off the water and dried her hands slowly. She wasn't angry yet. She was something worse. Deeply tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being treated like a burden in the home she once owned. Years ago, Margaret had signed the house over to Daniel. He was newly married. He said it would make things easier. She trusted him. She always trusted him. That trust was fading fast. She stepped into the hallway and looked at the family photos on the wall. Daniel as a baby, Daniel at his graduation, Daniel on his wedding day. Margaret was smiling in every picture, standing just slightly behind him. Always behind him. Margaret walked outside onto the back porch. The night air was cold, and snowflakes fell gently onto the railing. The world outside felt calm, almost peaceful. Inside the house, her heart felt heavy and loud. She sat down slowly, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to cry. The tears came quietly. No sobs, just steady, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't crying because of the words alone. She was crying because she finally understood something she had been avoiding for years. Her son no longer saw her as his mother. She was something else now. Someone lesser. Behind her, the back door creaked open. Margaret quickly wiped her face, but it was too late. Daniel stepped outside. "Why are you sitting out here?" he asked, annoyed. "People are still here." Margaret looked at him. Really looked at him. The boy she raised was gone. In his place stood a man she barely recognized. "I needed air," she said calmly. Daniel crossed his arms. "You're making things awkward." Margaret nodded. "I didn't mean to." There was a pause. "You know, Claire feels uncomfortable when you act like this." Margaret's chest tightened. "Act like what?" "Like you're the victim," he replied. You should be grateful. You live here. We take care of you. Margaret stared at him, stunned. I took care of you for 25 years, she said softly. Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. That was your job. You're my mother. The words crushed her. So that's all it was now. A job, a duty, nothing more. I never asked for anything back. I just wanted respect. Daniel shook his head. You're too sensitive. That sentence ended the conversation. Daniel turned and went back inside, leaving Margaret alone in the cold. She sat there for a long time, staring at the snow-covered yard. Her tears dried, replaced by a strange calm. Something inside her shifted, not into anger, but into clarity. She finally saw the truth. She had been shrinking herself for years to make others comfortable, and it had cost her everything. Inside the house, laughter returned. Glasses clinked. Life went on without her. Margaret stood up slowly. She didn't know what she would do yet. She didn't have a plan, but she knew one thing for sure. She could not stay silent anymore. Christmas night wasn't just revealing her pain, it was pushing her toward a choice she could no longer avoid. And soon, everyone would feel the weight of it. The letter arrived 3 days later. Margaret was standing at the kitchen counter when she saw it through the window, a white envelope placed carefully in her mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Her chest tightened. She waited until the mail truck drove away before stepping outside. The winter air felt sharp against her skin. She pulled the envelope out slowly, like it might bite. Inside was a single piece of paper. "We need to talk. This has gone too far. Daniel." Margaret let out a slow breath. Too far. She folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. For a moment, old habits tried to return. The urge to forgive, to smooth things over, to keep peace. But then she remembered the words. "You're just a waitress. You embarrassed us. You ruined everything." Margaret straightened her shoulders. No more. That afternoon, Margaret met her lawyer, a calm woman with sharp eyes and a gentle voice. "You did the right thing by coming now," the lawyer said, flipping through the documents. "Your son and his wife are in serious debt. They were counting on you." Margaret nodded. "They won't get anything." The lawyer looked up. "Are you sure?" Margaret didn't hesitate. "Yes." 2 days later, Daniel showed up at her door. Unannounced. Margaret watched him through the peephole. He looked tired, smaller than she remembered. His confidence was gone. She opened the door but didn't invite him in. "What do you want?" she asked. Daniel swallowed. "We need to talk." Margaret stepped aside but stayed near the doorway. Daniel looked around the house. "You really kicked us out." Margaret met his eyes. "You walked out." He sighed. "Claire is furious. She says you turned against us." Margaret laughed softly. "No, I stood up for myself." Daniel rubbed his face. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." "I understand enough," Margaret replied. "You insulted me to break me." Daniel's voice cracked. "I was desperate." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed firm. "So was I, and I never treated you like nothing." Daniel looked away. "I raised you. I sacrificed for you. And on Christmas night, you watched while your wife humiliated me." Daniel whispered. "I didn't stop her." "No," Margaret said. "You didn't." Silence filled the room. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Claire wants to meet, to explain." Margaret shook her head. "There is nothing to explain." Daniel stepped closer. "Mom, please, she's scared." Margaret looked him calmly. "Good." Daniel flinched. Margaret continued. "Because for the first time, I'm not." Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at her. "She says you're cruel." Margaret opened the door wider. "You can tell her this. Cruel is calling your mother a waitress in her own home." Daniel's shoulders sagged. "I loved you," he said quietly. Margaret nodded. "I loved you too." That hurt the most. She closed the door gently. That night, Margaret packed up the Christmas decorations alone. Each ornament felt heavy, but also freeing. She realized something important. She had mistaken silence for peace. Weeks passed. Legal letters were sent. The house remained in Margaret's name. Daniel stopped calling. Claire sent one last message filled with anger and blame. Margaret didn't reply. Instead, she planted flowers in the garden. One morning, Sarah stopped by with coffee. "You look lighter," Sarah said. Margaret smiled. "I feel lighter." "Any regrets?" asked Sarah. Margaret thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Only that I waited so long." Spring came early that year. Margaret hosted a small dinner. Just friends, no pressure, no insults. Laughter filled the house again. But this time, it was real. As the night ended, Margaret stood by the window, watching the lights outside. Her phone buzzed. A final message from Daniel. "I'm sorry." Margaret stared at the screen. Then she typed one sentence. "I forgive you, but I choose myself." She placed the phone down and turned off the light. For the first time in years, Margaret slept peacefully. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge. It's knowing your worth and never letting anyone treat you like less again. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional and meaningful life stories like this, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Hazel Stories. Your support helps me create more stories that touch the heart. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.